Hello everyone, this is class number 2 of nuk309. Last week was a little bit on the theoretical side. This week we have a shot to do, so there's a lot of work ahead of us. But before we start, just a quick question and a pretty quick answer. So the big question we always ask, why do I get bad edges? We're talking about extraction, of course. So in a perfect world, everything would have a solid edge and we would create mats in a matter of seconds and our life would be much easier. But in the real world, edges are fuzzy, or some of the edges, or half transparent, especially when a solid edge is out of focus. That's pretty self-explanatory. A solid edge is motion blurred. Or the object itself is half transparent or translucent, and here we're talking about everything from hair, cloth, rain, fog, and so forth. So we have two basic issues to deal with them. The easy one is the hue. So of course a green screen is green and a blue screen is blue, and we'll have green or blue in those fuzzy edges that we need to get rid of. The other one is the big issue, luminosity. So basically a green screen is a flat background that has a sort of a unified luminosity, and whenever you replace that background and put something else, almost always the background that you're going to put behind is going to have varying levels of luminosity, bright and dark. So wherever the luminosity value of the new background does not match the luminosity of the green screen, there is a potential for dark or bright edges, what we call bad edges, and that is very simple. So why do I get bad edges? Because you're replacing the background. So this is a pretty common misconception. People think that once they created a perfect clean extraction, they have the alpha or the mats and the color, and they combine them together, and now they expect to put them over different backgrounds and everything will work the same. But it won't. Whenever you change the background, problems with edges will pop up again. So the point I'm trying to make here is very simple. Your extraction really depends on the background you're putting behind it, and whenever you change the background or the color of the background, you have to be aware that it will also change your extraction look, and that needs to be revisited. So now that I made my point, let's start working. So here we are ready to go. I brought in the plate, I set it to start at frame 1, and the globals are set to start to frame 1 to 120 and the correct format. I also brought in the vector field with our grade from last class. It's always good to look at your comp both ways so that you know how it looks in the raw and how it looks in the QuickTime graded. And I also brought in the 4 images, and one of them we should use for the background. So as I said just before, it's important to set the background first. Let's just do this, and for that we'll do a really quick dirty extraction on this. So I like to use prime matte for this, and let's just swipe around. We really don't want to spend too much time here, so we're going to quickly clean up the background. You can hold Control and Shift on Windows and drag. That will clean up a whole area, or you can just hold Control like I'm doing right now. We don't mind if it's a little dirty, just a little bit here. And as you see, I'm playing with the gamma to see both the matte and the background. And now let's clean up the matte itself so that it doesn't have too many holes. So right here and right here. And that would be good for our purposes. Oh, I got some background noise to clean up here. Yeah. I think that's good enough. Okay, let's bring the gamma back. And this is about as dirty as we can get. The other thing I want to bring up at this point is spill suppression. So in your class material, you should have the Pixel Fudger plugin. It's a little set of plugins that's available for free, and the Kill Spill is probably the best despiller I know. I really like using it. I think that once you use it, you'll never want to go back to other methods. So it's easy to install. Just drop them in the plugins folder, And let's use that just to kill the spill so we don't have that green, because that might confuse us when we do the color for the background. So let's go into that, bring in a kill spill. And now we just want to copy the matte, our prime matte, and copy the color through the spill suppression. And let's pre-multiply this. And now we have an ugly but usable matte for setting the backgrounds. Now let's put something behind and see how it looks. If we look at these are 5K, these are stills. So of course we need to reformat them. Just to explain, as you can see, they are in the shoe store. So we need to make them feel like they are in a shoe store. This one looks like it's the outside of the store, but let's just try this one. So we just want to reformat it. And we want to put our foreground over. Well, yeah, that makes them look like they're outside the store. So this one we can delete. Let's try this one. The same thing, it's outside the store. So we're left with two. That one feels like it's going to be problematic for several reasons. The angle feels a little weird, even if we tweak the scale and so forth. The other thing is the lighting on them. If you look at the plate, let's see when she's in focus, the red-haired girl. There is some kind of strong light coming from this side, which we don't quite feel here. Actually, we feel like the light is coming from the other way around. We can try and flop it. But that's not looking great either. Let's try the last one. And obviously that one would make the best candidate with a little bit of tweaking. So let's do that. Now at this point, before we start repositioning the background to work, it might be a good idea to track it in, since there is a lot of camera. It's kind of handheld camera move. So we want to do that because we want to know if we rescale it, how much of it goes out of frame and so forth, because it's moving quite a lot there. So let's add a tracker node. And I don't think I need to teach you how to track a point in 2D. That's, I'm sure you all know. But just two things. One advice is I usually turn off the blue channel just because it's the noisy one, and it usually helps to get a cleaner track. The other thing, just looking at this specific footage, we start off with the tracking markers completely out of focus, and then they come in focus. So it might actually be a good idea to track from the end towards the beginning, just so that we start with in focus trackers. So, you know, let's add a track here. And we want to get this nice marker, maybe expand the range a little bit. And that's about it. You can let it track, and I usually as it goes, I'm tracking backwards. I usually just look at the at this window, and as long as I see that nothing is moving or hardly moving, I know that I have a good enough track, which it looks like this. So this is about as easy as it can get. Let's see how it handles the out of focus. Everything is great, so we got a track, no problem there. Now we're going to use this track for a lot of things because everything moves in this shot this kind of the same way. We're going to use it for the background, but we can also use it for any paint work that we can track, any rotos and so forth. So this will be our master track here. Let's just change it, the transform from none to match move 1 point. And now we can always clone that track and use it everywhere. So let's just do that. Alt K to clone. And we'll put this so now, and we can look at it at 8, so it goes fast. We have a track. Now a little trick, you know, sometimes when you track a green screen like this, everything feels almost too perfect, like the background is moving exactly like the foreground. Now on small moves like this, there really is not going to be a lot of parallax, but if you want to loosen up the track just a little bit to get a bit more of a kind of a natural feel, you can fake that by simply adding a little expression. If I go into my tracker transform and let's open the curve editor, and these are my translate X and Y on the track. You can select them, just that movement, and let's edit the expression here. And we just want to divide the curve to make it, basically just loosen it up a little bit. So we can do curve times 0.9, or let's try 0.8, and do the same for the Y times 0.8. And we can watch this again. Well, that might be a little too much, but we can always change it later to 0.9. You can see in your curves here, this is the original curve, and this is how we kind of squeezed it in a little bit, so it's not matching perfectly. For now, let's use, you know what, let's set it to 0.9. I think it's a bit too exaggerated, so just adding a tiny bit of leeway there. And you can see that our curves are now getting closer to the original. Now, it's a good idea from time to time to clear your cache, especially the buffers that get filled in pretty quick and things start slowing down. I usually clear all three of them: buffer, disk cache, and playback cache. Let's go back to 1, because we want to look at it. So, yeah, okay, here's our background. The one thing, except for the color, of course, which is totally off, the one thing that strikes me is that perspective is wrong. It feels like we're looking too much down. We see too much of the floor. The mannequin just behind her seems awfully high. What we want to do and try and adjust as much as we can, since we only have one still image here, there's not a lot we can do, but we can definitely scale it up a little bit. Let's try that. And then try and move it down as much as we can. That already feels much better. Let's make it small, because once we scale it up, we're making the whole environment behind them a little too tight. Let's try 1.05, and we get a black edge there. It's good, but it almost feels like we want to lower it a little bit more. And at this point, yeah, because it feels like the camera is looking slightly up, so that kind of feels better. What if we make it a little bigger? Well, that's not too bad. Now, here's our problem. So when we move the background down at the beginning, we're missing a piece at the top. I kind of like this. Let's look at the beginning again. So what if we make it a little bit smaller? Let's keep it at 1.1. So that feels pretty good. If that feels good, then our only issue here is extending the top to fill in this little gap there, which we can do later on. It's pretty simple, and we have to remember that the background will be kind of out of focus throughout the shot, depending on the rack. So it's probably not a giant matte painting work, probably just extending the color to fill in the ceiling there. So let's keep that, maybe just raise it a tiny bit, something like that. This is good. Now, it's time to add a little defocus there, just to see the background, to make it feel better. And what we want to know, I mean, we already analyzed this shot and we know that there is a rack focus going on. What we want to know is where it happens. So a good way to do that is to look at the girl in focus and see where she starts going out of focus. So now she's definitely out of focus. So I'd say, if you look here at her shirt, this is already starting. So I'd say 20 is the beginning. Then we can look at the girl that goes in focus and see where she's fully sharp and there is no more change on her. And it looks like this happens around 34. So remember this range, 20 to 34. This is our rack focused range because we'll need to do it, to use it for several things. For now, we just want to apply to the background. So that will go after the tracker. Let's just add a filter. And that's going to be a simple defocus. Of course, there is no Z defocus because we don't have a Z depth, and we probably don't need it. The whole shot is very shallow depth of field. So it's either in focus or not in focus. So let's go to frame 20. That's our last frame of before the rack, and she's completely out of focus, so we can put the background pretty much. Let's try 20. I'd even go with 30. Now, what confuses us is our bad edges, and this also shows how important and how hard defocus edges are. Because our extraction is really, really hard matte, things just don't look the same. But I'm looking at her eyes and her mouth and the features on her, and I'm thinking between 20 and 30, that's the right amount of defocus there. Let's keep it 25 and set a keyframe there. And let's move to the end of the rack focus, which we said is 34. And now we want to put it back in focus. But looking at the other girl, and again, don't let these hard edges confuse you. She's pretty much out of focus by this time. So it might be a good idea to put the background just a little bit out of focus behind her. I mean, we can even cheat on that. Let's try 5. Yeah, 5 or 4. Just a little bit defocused, and that would give us kind of a nice range. Now, the next thing we want to do, of course, is color. Currently, it's completely off. And, you know, when it gets to color, and I think color is the essence of compositing or visual effects in general, it becomes very subjective. There are no rules and there are no precise methods. It's not like tracking or getting a 3D camera. There is no precision tools here. It has to work by eye. And there are different ways and different methods to colorize. Some people like to start with setting the whites and the blacks. I usually prefer to start with the simplest thing and go from simple to more advanced, so to say. So let's add a grade node. So instead of trying to set the black point and white point, I start by setting a general color tone to the whole thing using a gain. Because what we can see now is that the background looks very kind of warmish, greenish, and the foreground is much more bluish. And a good way to assess this is looking at natural whites and natural grays. So we want to look at her shirt, we want to look at her shirt, we want to look at this shoe, we want to look at this shoe. We don't want to look at the red hair or the blue jeans jacket, which already have a hue to them. So let's try starting by just darkening the whole thing a little bit and adding blue back. All right, this is starting to look better. The whites still feel a little bit too green. Maybe we need to pull a little bit of it. And maybe a little bit more blue. Yeah, something like this. That's, I think, much closer. Now, another thing is the blacks in the background feel awfully strong. I mean, don't look at the top because that's just a hole that we didn't fix it. But you look here, you look here, you look at this mannequin. Now, blacks are tough because you don't want to lift them too much. Start getting everything kind of fuzzy and decontrasted. But let's add a little bit of lift. Let's say like 0.005. Yeah, it's just giving it a little bit, you know, making it a little bit closer to the foreground, because you look at her hair, her head, you look at this shoe, the blacks are, you know, are not that pronounced. So this is without lifting the blacks. It definitely feels a bit too punchy. This is with a little lift of the blacks, not too much, and that's working better. Now let's see what else we can do. So there is something a bit too flat in this image. It definitely doesn't match the lighting on them, and we can get a better sense of it here. Or, you know, we can also do is look at this through our grade, which actually is a good idea to do now, because the grade punches up the colors and the contrast much more, and this is actually feeling pretty nice already. You see the sense of strong light on the girl's face, and on this one too. If you look at it when she's in focus, you can see the back is dark. You can see it on her shirt, on her hands, and there is a little bit of it in here in the actual image, but we might want to make it even more pronounced. So what we can do first of all is, and I like using the multiply as a second gain because it is what it is. Multiply and gain are the same in the grade node. So let's take the whole thing down. Maybe this is too much, but let's start from this. So now everything is kind of darkish, but what we want to do is brighten up this area to make it feel, you know, kind of add some lighting depth. So let's add another grade. Now this one we want to put after the reformat, just because we're going to use a roto to constrain it, and we don't want to have a problem with the roto not being in the right format. Let's put a rectangle right about here. Let's give it a lot of blur, I'd say 1000, so it's very gradual. And let's start pulling the gain here. And, you know, as I pull, it's starting to feel pretty nice. Let's settle for like 1.9. And now we can move that and exactly define where we want that grading or to occur. Now this feels pretty good. We might want to lift the blacks a little bit more now. This is not bad, you know. I mean, right now the thing that throws us off is the bad edges being so bright over, so they feel like they are totally cut out against that dark background. But of course, when we start working on our extraction, things are going to start blending in. So let's use this as a starting point, and again, now we're looking at it through the grade. Let's look at it in raw. It feels, you know, more even because there's not so much contrast pool. Let's keep it like this. We can always tweak it. Just remember that when you tweak your background, you have to look at your extraction, make sure that everything still works the same. Okay, I think that now it's time to start working on the extraction itself. And of course, the first thing we want to do is get rid of these markers. Now, this is not a big deal because they don't, you know, fortunately, they don't go underneath the girls and don't go through hair or anything like that. That should be an easy thing to do. So let's put in a paint node here. And what we want to do is we want to do a one-time paint and heavy tract. So we can take our tracker. We want to go to the translate XY, and we want to copy links. So it's going to keep it linked to our rotopane. Then go to our rotopane, select the root node, go to transform, and we want to paste this. And we want to paste absolute, of course. So now they're linked, and whatever we paint anywhere in here should follow through. So let's select the clone tool, and one thing you want to make sure you do is change it from single to all, so that it won't be a single frame or anything like that. And now we just want to paint these over. So this is one. Maybe go to another frame where it's more. Okay, maybe it's a good idea to do it at the beginning where they're out of focus, and we can definitely, if you see some poking up still, you can paint over. And the last one. And just now check and see. Now if it's a little different here, we still have a little bit here. Just make sure you paint from an angle that's not going to catch her or anything. Here's a little one pointing here. So just do a little cleanup. And that should be it. If you see a little bit of... oh, this guy is persistent. So this guy is getting really close to her head, so we have to be a little bit more careful here. I think that's about the closest it gets. That's it. If the green feels a little different or anything like that, that's not a big issue. All of this will go away with the extraction. Here's a little one pointing. The only thing you want to make sure is that you don't have any yellow in there or red, because that's of course not going to key. Alright, so this is our plate with the markers painted out. Let's add a no-op node. And the reason I'm doing it is simply, I mean, you can put a point, it's the same idea, but we're going to connect different things to this input. And if you change anything over here, the plate, it's easier to have something in between so you don't have to reconnect all the connections. That's about it. Now we're going to use the IBK extraction, and I just want to say something about the IBK. The reason I like using it is because it's not a pre-multiplied extraction. That is, you're not painting in black everything that's outside the matte. So the extraction is very noisy and dirty. What IBK does is kind of camouflage all this dirt and noise by coloring it to the color of the background. The advantage of using the IBK is you can get much softer edges and much better blends. The disadvantage is that usually the core will not be totally solid, and that's why you want to add the core extraction to it. The other thing is that the IBK, like every other extraction algorithm, has some quirks that you have to go around, but it's definitely my preferred method. So we'll start by adding an IBK color node. And the IBK color just is there to create, to tell the IBK extractor what color the green screen is. And it does that by creating a sort of a clean green screen. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that everything that's green screen is green and everything that's not green screen is black. And as you can see right now, we have lots of holes in here, and that really depends on the luminosity values of the green screen. So basically you want to play with the darks and lights to get this filled in. So let's start with the darks, and you can see that as you push these in, you're starting to fill in the blacks, but you're also starting to get blacks on the green screen. So for that, you need to go into the lights and compensate for that. So it's a bit of a tweaking. Let's set this to let's set this higher. Okay, there's a little bit of holes there, but what you can see is that part, which is all her hair, is becoming sort of half transparent, and that's exactly what you want. If you'll have this part, the hair, all black, the extraction is going to be too harsh there. If you see all the hair here kind of in between, that will be the precise setup. So you can also tweak the IBK color as you proceed with your extraction. You don't have to set everything right now, but you can see it will affect the IBK extractor a lot. So next comes in the IBK keyer, or gizmo as it's called, and of course you want to connect your color input to the color and your foreground to your foreground. Let's just make it a little cleaner. And very importantly, the BG, you want to connect that. And while we do that, and here's our BG, I think we want to add grain at this stage. And you know, a lot of people add the grain to the background right at the end, but the grain really helps with figuring out the extraction, because a lot of noise that we see on a non-grained image kind of gets hidden when there is grain. And it's confusing to extract and have this noise without adding some grain. So let's do it right now, and let's use our all dirty extraction for it, just to add some grain in there. We can look at the blue channel, And you see how grainy that feels and how clean our image is. So right at the end, we want to add a gray node. And we're looking at the blue channel. It feels a bit too big and a bit too strong. What we want to make sure is that we have enough grain in the darks or in the blacks. And if you see at the image here, there is a lot of it in the darks in the blue channel. And if we just take the blue because now it's too strong and start reducing it, we'll lose a lot of it in the darks. So what you want to do is first set the blacks, and we can set it for all three channels. And let's add, let's see how much, 0.1. Well, that's too much, 0.01. Let's do 0.005. So now we have some grain in the blacks there, and now we can set the actual level, and it's way too high now. So for that, you need to look at different luminosity values. So we looked at the darks. Now we can compare this to her here, and I think the blue should be actually a bit bigger. And it probably needs to be less than that. So let's reduce it to about this. Let's look at the green, way too strong. And the red is, and we can see here, that's a good comparison. Red is probably too big. The green is also a little too big. Green is fine. Let's put it to 2.5. We can push the green a little bit and push the red down. Surprisingly, there's quite a lot of grain in the red channel. Now, we don't have to set them totally precisely. We can always change, but we want to have something in there. Maybe a little bit more blue. And let's make the blue irregularity same as the other stuff. Well, that's good enough for now. You want to have that little bit of grain because it's going to help you with the IBK. All right, so let's look at all the color channels, and let's go back to our IBK gizmo. Right now, the alpha is wrong because we have to set it to green. Now, you have an option in the IBK to set it to pick, and then you're basically going to pick the color. Same as like other extractors. But now we're going to use the C green or the color green, which is our IBK color node that we just set up. And as you can see, the alpha or the matte is extremely dirty, but that doesn't need to deter you. This is the way it should be. And you can see all the nice color here. You can also see some green screen poking through, some really weird bits. Now, what are these bits? That's because in the IBK color, after we set the black and the green, we didn't patch the black. So basically, you want to shrink all these blacks so that they don't pump out through. You do that. You can go beyond the slider. Let's put it to 8. And now we kind of have a nice clean green screen. And if we look back at the IBK gizmo, all this stuff that we saw before is now gone. Now, our background is already connected. And I want to show you, before we actually put it over the background, what background luminance and chroma and luminance match do. So first of all, screen subtraction is the built-in screen suppression, and usually it works very well, as you can see here. Background luminance, look what happens when I bring it in. It's bringing in the luminance values of the background, and that ties it to exactly what we were talking about at the beginning of the class. You want to match luminance to your background. Chroma is going to match the hues. As you can see, it's becoming warmer to match the background. You have to be really careful about using chroma because sometimes it actually does things that you don't want to. I'll show you in a moment. Luminance match is usually used to push in the edges a little bit, and you can see how it's actually pushing to get a bit of a cleaner extraction, usually at the expense of losing some detail. But the interesting thing is that you can see how much detail you already are getting. And this is a point where I want to talk about denoising or degraining. A lot of compositors start by degraining their plate before extracting. I won't say I'm against it as a general rule, but I'm against it as a rule when we're dealing with things that have a lot of wispy detail, like hair. And I want to show you why. Of course, degraining the plate will make all the extractions so much easier and less noisier, and it's going to be faster to work on. Let's open the denoise tool, which is really useful, by the way. And let's look at our original plate, and we can certainly take that little, where are you, here, and put it over the green screen to get a denoise. So let's look at it with the denoise. So everything is much cleaner, but we're losing detail. Besides the fact that her eyes, if you look really closely, are getting a little blurry. And this is actually, the denoise is a very good algorithm, and there are other degrainers available, plugins that do a great job, but there is no such thing as a lossless degrain. It just doesn't exist. Where you're taking out grain, you're taking out detail from the image, and the grainier the image is, the more it will happen. Unfortunately, look at her hair. That's without the grain, that's with. Now, there's still a lot of detail in there because we're talking about 3K images, which is great. There's more pixel per strand, so to say. But I would keep the denoise for creating a core matte. That will definitely make it better, or for certain areas. But first start doing the extraction without denoising, using the original grain and just matching it on the background, because you want to get as much detail as you want, and you don't want to start blurring your image. So denoise is out for now. Okay, let's go back to our IBK, and after we looked at these, we want to make sure luminance match is not turned on for now. We want to leave chroma out. I never ever use auto level. I don't even know what they do, but they certainly don't look like they're doing something nice. Never use that. If anyone knows what this is for, I'll be happy to know. In the luminance match, I almost never use this enable and the luminance level. Again, not sure exactly what it does. Red weight and blue-green weight, yes, but very carefully, and we look at it over the background. Let's put it over. So as you can see, I'm not pre-multiplying anything. There's no pre-multiplication here. And just connect to the background. And this is how it goes right now. So one thing you can see is the amount of detail that we're getting on the hair, which is great. Compare this to our, previous matte. This is great. The amount of detail here, you can definitely see noise and grain. Now, one area where this happens a lot is, of course, wherever something is defocused, as we talked earlier. Defocus edges are hard because they definitely just break into grain, as you can see here. So we'll have to treat this, and there are simple ways to do that, not in the IBK. One thing you want to be aware of is the added noise that it comes with. So one good way is to compare the background with and without your extraction and see if there's added noise. And you can see a little bit of like all these, little things popping in there. But because we're having grain in there, they're kind of hidden, camouflaged here too. There's definitely some noise in there. So over here, we might need to do something to reduce that amount. Now, I just want to say something. Let me show you what happens when you disable background luminance. Oh, wow. There's plenty of noise. Basically, everything is now popping. Now, background luminance is great to camouflage the noise. The only thing is that sometimes this goes on expense of detail. And on some occasions, on certain areas, you might want to use a separate IBK extractor without the background luminance to get some more detail. In the case here, I'm not sure we'll use it. Now, here is a perfect example of what I said at the beginning of the class. We've replaced a background which has a kind of a unified luminosity. It's actually pretty bright throughout the whole image. We've replaced that with a background that goes really bright here but goes really dark there. And as you can see, everything already looks pretty nice over the bright background, but things start looking weird over the dark. And this is because we replaced the background. It's as simple as this. Okay, let's look at the use background chroma and see if it actually helps us here. So turn it on. It's a very subtle change, but you can see, for example, this girl's hair going slightly bluer to match the background. Let's see when she's in focus if this is helping us any. And again, you can see when she's in focus how much hair detail we're getting with the IBK. We're also getting a little bit of noisy stuff, but a little bit of an edge there. I think we can do without the background chroma. All right, so our time is starting to run out on this class, and there's still a lot to do. We don't have a core matte. We have to treat the IBK, and we have to fix all these edges. And there's one great tool that I usually use that will go through it in the next class called the edge blur. Really simple to use and can help you a lot with that. What you will need to do for next week, of course, feel free to go on and do the shot. But one thing I'm already telling you you'll have to do is a soft matte for one of the girls just to separate them. And the reason is that they both are in different focus levels. When one is in focus, the other one is not. And we want to use a hefty amount of edge blur to help with the defocus ones. So we need to separate them. This should just be a rough soft matte around her. Just make sure that where the intersection happens, that it works well. We want to have a way to quickly separate these two and give them separate treatments. And finally, you can use the tracker for all your rotos, which will make everything much easier because they are actually not moving a lot. What is moving is the camera. So if you use apply your tracker to the transform of your rotos, just like we did for the paint, that will make everything much faster. So we'll go back to this shot next week. Feel free to go on with it. And next week, we're going to finish this shot, and then we'll start working on the balcony. So I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.